This is The Exchange on NHPR. I'm Laura Kanoy. It's our Race for the First series. Each Monday, we introduce you to a candidate running for New Hampshire's 1st congressional district. Since incumbent Carol Shea Porter announced she won't run again in this swing district, many have jumped in. At last count, 3 on the Republican side and 9 Democrats. We want your questions this morning, especially if you're a 1st district voter. Our email is exchange@nhpr.org. Again, exchange@nhpr.org. Use Facebook or Twitter at NHPR Exchange, or give us a call, 1-800-892-6477. You can also watch our interview today on Facebook Live. Our candidate this hour is Democrat Lincoln Soldati, former Stratford County attorney. He served as a Somersworth school board member and as the city's mayor. Mr. Soldati, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. A pleasure being here.
So lots of candidates in this field, as I mentioned, 9 Democrats. Give us the 30-second elevator speech, if you could, please. Why should Democratic primary voters listening to us right now pick you over the other 8?
Well, let me start with the most obvious thing, and that is I'm the most experienced candidate running because, in part, I'm the oldest candidate running. And there's several things about that. As you mentioned, I've held public office. In fact, I've been elected to more positions in New Hampshire than all other candidates combined. In addition, I've been a trial attorney for almost 40 years until my recent retirement, and that means I was a professional advocate. So I understand what advocacy is. I know how to convince a group of people who are strangers unanimously that the position I'm promoting is the correct one. And of course, my 9 years as a Stratford County attorney, I demonstrated an ability to take on systemic change, and particularly in the areas of sexual assault and child abuse cases. We did things in Stratford County that really transformed the way victims of sexual assault were treated in the state, to an extent that much of what we did is now a statewide standard. In addition to that, I think that the fact that I'm not running to build a political career. I've had a wonderful career. I could fade off into the sunset and enjoy my retirement, but circumstances compelled me to run. And
now, what do you mean by that? Circumstances
I'll
compelled me to run. What do you mean by that?
Well, after the election, of course, I was somewhat despondent.
As a Democrat, not surprising.
As a Democrat, absolutely. And so I decided I need to sort of get out of myself a little bit, and I went out to North Dakota to Standing Rock and spent some time with the Sioux Nation fighting for their water rights. And that was a very meaningful experience to me, and I brought back with it an ethic, a legacy that the Sioux talk about, which is to be of use. So I came back, closed down my law practice, and became an Uber driver, which some people find amusing. But
it's a good way to meet people in the district.
Well, it's not only a good way to meet people, but the fact is, if you've ever been in Portsmouth on a Friday or a Saturday night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., you understand it's also a community service. So that's part of it.
So your time with the Sioux, and they were protesting the Keystone XL pipeline, right? Saying it would ruin their lands and so forth. And then environmental groups were involved with that, obviously, because they felt like this was just more, contributing to greenhouse gases and climate change. And let's talk then about global warming or climate change. Call it what you will. Absolutely. We won't get into the semantics. Yeah. As a member of Congress, Mr. Soldati, what is the first step you would take to tackle this?
Well, first of all, I would promote legislation that would get the United States back into the Paris Accords. I also think that we need to encourage, as is happening, states to take initiatives when the federal government refuses to do so. I think we need to hold this administration accountable, particularly with the likes of Pruitt, who has literally destroyed the environmental protections in this country. And of course, we've taken a back seat. We are no longer the leaders of the world, whether on climate change or virtually any other issue that's facing the world. We've really withdrawn. We're no longer the leaders, and I think we need to let the world know, and indeed the American public know, that Democrats do stand for the future. They stand for this country, and they stand for environmental protection.
So first step, Congressman Soldati would work to pull America back to the Paris Accord. What about nuclear energy? The Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant, as you know, is in the 1st District. The governor recently announced his support for keeping Seabrook going as long as possible. Some people say, hey, this could cut down on greenhouse gases. Nuclear energy is greenhouse gas free. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think we really ought to focus on renewable energies that are actually clean for the environment. And I still think the problem that the nuclear industry faces is they have yet to solve the problem of disposal of nuclear waste. And until we can address that, I think we need to not push forward with nuclear. There's more promise, I think, in the development of hydrogen energy. Fusion still is on the horizon in terms of technological advances.
Boy, I haven't heard about that in a long time.
I know we haven't, but
is that sort of actively being explored or considered anymore in a real, meaningful, ready to come to market way?
Well, it is among scientists that have the resources to continue to do that. But in addition, with wind and solar, there are a lot of advances that have been. We've actually passed the tipping point where wind and solar provide actually a more economical means now of producing electricity. For example, we need to recognize that fossil fuels are a thing of the past.
So, given that you feel that way, how do you feel about the governor's new energy strategy that emphasizes more conservation, efficiency, but also fossil fuels like natural gas?
Well, I think conservation and efficiency are huge. In fact, it's been demonstrated that through efficiency and conservation, we actually can do more and save more in terms of environmental impact than many other forms. But I think we need to recognize that the fossil fuel, emphasis on fossil fuel, is not the future. It is the past. And what really is at stake here is the future. We're talking about our grandchildren. What kind of world we're going to leave our grandchildren? And that's where my concern is. My concern is the future.
One more question about energy, and then I have a bunch more questions for you, Mr. Soldati. What about hydropower? Supporters of Northern Pass said, hey, this is a great opportunity to bring a major source of non-fossil fuel energy into the region. So what about that?
Well, my understanding on the Northern Pass thing is that the people who are going to be affected by that are not going to reap any of the benefits. Hydropower per se, there's nothing wrong with hydropower depending upon how it's done and how it affects the economy immediately in the area where, for example, a dam is being built. That's certainly preferable to fossil fuels because it doesn't create carbon to enter the atmosphere. But the problems with Northern Pass are less about hydropower itself than it is the transmission lines and the properties that's going through. So that's the issue with Northern Pass, not the production of electricity
hydro
through
itself. Right. All right. Well, let's switch gears and talk about another issue that is definitely going to be a biggie in this race for the 1st Congressional District, and that's guns, Mr. Soldati. As a New Hampshire native, you know there's a long tradition of gun rights, minimal regulation when it comes to gun ownership. But you've said as you campaign that gun safety is an important issue for you. First off, why gun safety instead of gun control?
Well, because it is recognizing that guns are, in the first place, a dangerous instrumentality, just as an automobile is. And, for example, with an automobile, we require you to get a license and to take a test and demonstrate that you're proficient and can drive and operate an automobile safely. It seems to me that if we're focusing on gun safety, then someone seeking to purchase or own a gun ought to be able to demonstrate that they know how to handle it safely, they know how to store it safely, and have some minimal requirement for them to demonstrate an understanding of how to use that safely. Because let's face it, it is a dangerous instrumentality.
So what specific changes would you like to see in current federal law?
Well, one, I would require some form of demonstration of proficiency and understanding. And in fact, there actually are states that do that
just
now.
Like a driver's license.
Like a driver's license, right. Just so that, the person who's getting that weapon has demonstrated they know how to use it. And I don't think there's anything unreasonable about that requirement, any more than it's unreasonable to require people to get a driver's license to show they know how to operate a vehicle safely. But I think there are other things that we can do. I certainly think that having a waiting period makes sense. Whether it's 72 hours, we can talk about what would be appropriate. But I think 72 hours makes sense, and I think would save a lot of people a lot of lives from suicides, because there are a number of people who purchase firearms for the first time for the purpose of committing suicide.
I wonder about the, there's a flip side to that. The woman who's being stalked by a scary ex-boyfriend. Do you really want to tell her to wait 72 hours?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that I would suggest that a woman who is being stalked by an ex-boyfriend, that her road to safety is to get a firearm.
Might make her feel better.
Well, I think we actually need to provide her some safety, and not some real safety, and not actually just make her feel better. This is not about feeling good. It's about the safety of women and others that are being threatened. So if you're being threatened, you need to go to the police. This is a crime. This is something that needs to be reported and dealt with accordingly. And self-help through a firearm is not going to be the solution.
Our guest is Lincoln Soldati. He's a longtime county prosecutor, former school board member in Somersworth, former mayor of Somersworth. It's our Race for the First series, where we introduce you each Monday to a candidate for the 1st Congressional District. We've still got time to get your questions in for Mr. Soldati. Send us an email, exchange@nhpr.org, or give us a call, 1-800-892-6477. Couple more questions for you, Mr. Soldati. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi has said she will run for House Speaker again if Democrats win a majority in the fall. Of course, nobody knows if that's going to happen or not. But as you know, some Democrats who've been running for office in special elections this year have distanced themselves from Ms. Pelosi, saying it's time for a new, younger generation of leaders. Would you support Nancy Pelosi for House Speaker if you go to Congress?
Well, I don't personally know Nancy Pelosi, so it's a bit premature for me to be making that kind of a decision. But this is the way I would approach it. If Nancy Pelosi is willing to have as a priority and promote single-payer Medicare for all health care, then I would support her, because for me it's about the issues, not the personality. The fact is Nancy Pelosi has demonstrated over the years an ability to get things done when Democrats have been in power. 200 and some odd pieces of legislation, everything from Lilly Ledbetter to the Affordable Care Act. But there are issues that I care about very deeply, and if Nancy Pelosi or any other person who's seeking the House leadership position is going to be on board with that, then I certainly would consider them. But if they are not willing to go out and have that as a priority, then I would not support it.
So it's really for you about the issues. It's
it
not
has
about,
to be about the issues, right? Absolutely. And if you're making your decision on other reasons, then you're not paying attention.
I want to ask you about the opioid crisis here in New Hampshire and the sort of federal and state interplay on that issue. You're a lawyer, you're a former prosecutor. So from that position, I wonder what you think about the proper role of law enforcement in this epidemic.
Well, I think one of the things that we've gotten wrong ever since Richard Nixon is the whole concept of the war on drugs as if it's a criminal justice issue. I've had clients as a defense attorney that have suffered from addiction, are faced with criminal charges, oftentimes put in jail and have as a condition of their bail that they have to commit to rehabilitation and getting a bed before they would be allowed to be released on bail. And of course, the problem is in New Hampshire, you'd wait 6, 8, sometimes 18 months for a bed to be available. We have to stop thinking about this problem as a criminal justice issue and recognize that addiction is a medical issue.
So is our focus these days out of whack, Mr. Soldati?
It's been out of whack since Richard Nixon, frankly. We jail far too many people in terms of drug offenses, and it's used oftentimes in ways that implicate other issues as well. I think that for example, we ought to remove on the federal level, if we're talking federal, we ought to remove marijuana from the Schedule I drugs.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should do that. I think states should be free to legalize marijuana for recreational use. And I think that would actually help with some of the opioid crisis. Many people believe that it is useful in terms of medicinal effects in terms of helping people with addictions. But I also think the whole issue of addiction needs to be researched further. I don't think we have enough research done on addiction in terms of the effects of various drugs on the brain.
Well, let's talk about that, and this is real interesting because we've heard from so many people in recovery from opioids on this show, and I have heard people say what you just said, which is, legalizing marijuana could help people with pain, could help them in other ways, could help them maybe not turn to opioids. But then I've heard from plenty of people, Mr. Soldati, who say, I started with marijuana, and after a while, it wasn't enough of a high, so I turned to stronger drugs,
well, I bet
aka
they started
heroin.
with beer. I bet they started with beer, and then they started with hard liquor, or they started, and maybe some of them actually drank milk at some point. It's a ludicrous argument to say that it is somehow that this whole notion of gateway drugs. We need to examine not the supply side of the drug issue, but the demand side and why people turn to drugs. And there are many reasons. Some people get into drugs because the pharmaceutical companies, for too long, fostered OxyContin. Many advertised it as non-addictive, if you can believe that.
Yeah, that whole backstory about the drug companies and so forth, and doctors, giving these out freely.
And they're never held accountable, are they? No, never. So this is a complex issue. This is not a few dollars are going to solve the problem. But we need to address it from a scientific standpoint and get the research done, which for the most part we haven't done. We've simply been reactive to the problem. But I think Colorado puts the lie to the idea that marijuana is somehow a gateway drug. Because and we see it with other states as well. And states ought to be free to make their own laws with respect to many of these things.
Well, hard to believe. We have almost run out of time. I know. It goes fast, doesn't it? I did want to ask you one last quick question. So what have you learned being an Uber driver? That's really interesting. I think you're the first candidate I've talked to who's an Uber driver.
Well, I've learned that people are people. People come from all walks of life. They all, and for the most part, I've learned that we all want the same things. We want a better life for our children. We want to be healthy. We all basically want the same things. It's sort of the same thing I learned in the West Bank in terms of my dealings with the Palestinians. We're all people. We all share a common humanity, and that's really what makes us special.
Well, Mr. Soldati, I have to cut you off there. I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
That's Lincoln Soldati, again, candidate in the Democratic primary for the 1st Congressional District. Next Monday, our Race for the First series continues with Democrat Mark McKenzie. Check out the entire series online, and you can also watch it on Facebook Live. This is The Exchange on NHPR.